Okay. You have been watching what I think many would describe as a somewhat strange news conference there, where the President of the United States is apparently buying a Tesla. Elon Musk was there. But the big news is, of course, what we're following in this country, and that is the President of the United States reacting to Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, deciding to pause that surcharge of electricity on 1.5 million customers in 3 American states. As a result of that, saying that it was Doug Ford that called the Commerce Secretary. The Premier of Ontario says it was the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, that called Doug Ford, saying that there's a strong man in Canada that he's not going to put in this surcharge. I respect that. And repeating his lines about being very unfairly treated in Canada. He referred to Doug Ford as a gentleman and repeated what he says are subsidies from Canada, and also that Canada should become the 51st state, that Canada doesn't spend very much on the military, that they wouldn't have to worry about the border and taxes, and repeating also what he has said about the artificially drawn line that he said looks like it was done with a ruler, referring to the border between Canada and the United States, on whether or not the 50% tariffs on aluminum and steel will be imposed on Canada. He says we'll see. The CBC's Richard Madden is in our Washington bureau, and he was watching what was happening there at the White House. And so, Richard, you know, what's kind of stood out to you from, I don't think I've ever really heard a U.S. president talk that much about an Ontario premier before. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't, but just your thoughts.
Well, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been really making the rounds on American networks, and we know President Trump watches a lot of TV and likely caught him on one of his hits, whether it's CNN or Fox News or MSNBC. But you asked about takeaways. I think perhaps the biggest one, let's focus on the setting, because President Trump essentially turned the White House into a Tesla showroom. He promoted the electric car, owned, of course, by his billionaire ally Elon Musk, and this is in reaction to the shares of Tesla that have sunk in recent days, as perhaps as a backlash to Musk's unwielding power in the administration and his role overseeing the huge number of job cuts. So perhaps this is a way for Trump to prop up those sliding shares of Tesla, promising to buy one. But as far as the takeaways when it comes to tariffs and this escalating tariff war with Canada is what you noted off the top about acknowledging Ontario Premier Doug Ford's decision to suspend those 25% energy surcharge to several northeastern states ahead, of course, with his meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on Thursday. And Trump also signaled he may be open to some sort of deal to lower the temperature on this tariff war, hinting he may hold off or pause more tariffs on Canada. You heard reporters asking him that question if he's going to do it. Trump said, probably. Keep in mind those steel and aluminum tariffs that Trump has threatened to double are supposed to kick in tomorrow. So we're going to stay tuned for that. Trump does have a few more public events later today, so we will likely also hear from him. But then if it looks like he's opening the door to some compromise on these tariffs, we also saw the president pushing that 51st state nonsense, calling the border an artificial line. So, Andrew, I suspect that is not going to go over well with the Canadians. So I say, as I said, stay tuned for more of this later this afternoon. But I also wanted to share some other newsworthy headlines from the president in that little moment he had. He said he's going to be speaking to Russian President Vladimir Putin sometime, he says, next week. And of course, this follows that significant news on the other side of the Atlantic that the U.S. agreed to lift the suspension of military aid and intelligence sharing for Ukraine. So that is significant. There's also word that Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky has proposed some 30-day ceasefire. But of course, that depends where Russia stands in all of this. So some significant newsworthy moments from that unusual scene on the South Lawn of the White House. President Trump now meets with business executives for a roundtable, so I suspect we might hear more from corporate America's reaction to this on-again, off-again tariff war between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
Lots to follow. Richard, appreciate that very much. The CBC's Richard Madden live in Washington. Now, tough talk from Ontario's Premier appears to have caught Washington's attention, as you saw there. Doug Ford slapped a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. yesterday. But after some outreach, he's pausing the levy, at least for now. And the CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick is on that angle and was here with me live as we were watching the twists and turns of all of this back and forth. So why did Ford back off?
Yeah, and again, just to remind people, this was a surcharge that was just imposed yesterday, and now today he's backing off. Now, this is a what amounts to a 25% surcharge, they say, on the electricity that Ontario sells to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. Ford had signaled he would do this, and he followed through yesterday. And at his news conference yesterday, he said he was willing to escalate the surcharge even higher if this tariff war between Canada and the U.S. goes on, and potentially even escalate to the point of cutting off electricity altogether. He was asked at the news conference yesterday if he could actually do that, and he said yes, they've done their due diligence and they can cut off hydroelectricity. Now, fast forward to today. Obviously, we saw President Donald Trump's reaction, what he's been writing on social media this morning, particularly singling out Doug Ford and Ontario's move. And now Ford had a phone call with Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and they've agreed to meet in Washington on Thursday in person. And Ford has agreed to pause the surcharge, and he says this is because there's been too much back and forth now, and it was ratcheting up. The temperature was getting too high, and he says he has made this offer to pause the surcharge so that cooler heads can prevail. He said what he heard from Lutnick was an olive branch, and he believes when you are in negotiations with parties, if they offer you an olive branch, you should take it. Take a listen to Ford.
Going back and forth with each other, it just hurts both countries. So I want to thank Secretary Lutnick for reaching out, putting that olive branch in. I've been in business a number of years, a lot of negotiations, and part of the last negotiation, when someone does that, you have to respect that person for putting out that olive branch, and I'm going to make sure we go down there and have a very good but strong and confident conversation.
And he did describe the conversation with Lutnick as productive. We know when they spoke last week, it was a pretty tense conversation, but Ford describing it as productive, saying they discussed the markets and how they have been reacting to this tariff back and forth. They discussed the auto sector, he said. Ford said he told Lutnick that if these tariffs go through, assembly lines in Michigan will shut down. And he described a bit of the nature of the conversation. When asked if he thinks Trump will change his mind again and not go through with the 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, Ford's answer was that Lutnick has to bounce that idea off of Trump. But Ford says he's confident the president will pull back. And again, we're sort of just waiting for whatever.
Pull back to 25%.
Potentially. And or I want to also talk about April 2nd, because that's sort of the next round of tariffs from President Trump, not just on Canada, but all of the U.S.'s trading partners. And he calls them reciprocal tariffs. Ford was saying in his explanation today that he doesn't want to wait until April 2nd to be negotiating and trying to sort this all out. And that's partly why he is going to go down there and meet with Lutnick and the U.S. trade representative. These are key people. The fact that he's getting a face-to-face meeting is significant. And he will be with Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc. But let's get to, Andrew, what Trump said about Ford just a few seconds ago. I think it's worth playing the clip. Let's take a look.
Already Canada, and I respect very much. As you know, there's a very strong man in Canada who said he was going to charge a surcharge or a tariff on electricity coming into our country. He has called and he said he's not going to do that. Okay, he's not going to do that. And it would have been a very bad thing if he did, and he's not going to do that, so I respect that. But we were just informed that he's not going to do that. Look, we've been treated very unfairly by Canada.
He said he called. I just point out that we're hearing the opposite from Premier Ford, saying it was Lutnick that reached out to Ford. Ford was asked, does he anticipate meeting directly with Donald Trump while he's in Washington, meeting with those key members of his team? He said he didn't know. All he knows is that he will be meeting with Lutnick and the U.S. trade representative. And hopefully, he said, Canada's ambassador to Washington, Kirsten Hillman, if she's available, she's invited to join that meeting as well. So that will certainly be an interesting day in Washington. But Ford has said that electricity surcharge is a tool in their toolbox, a card that they were willing to play, and they played it. And he said it got the attention of the U.S. And what they're getting now is a meeting with Howard Lutnick.
And he said he is lifting this for now.
Yes, because he said yesterday he can impose the charge, he can take it off, he can impose it. It's fluid.
It is fluid.
And so that's why he could do it yesterday. And I guess today they're giving the instruction to the energy operators and generators to not impose whatever energy is being sold today.
Yeah.
Tomorrow they could put it back on. So it could change day to day.
Megan, thank you. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick here in our Toronto newsroom.